What happens when the most hyped rookie in basketball finally gets exposed on the biggest stage? Because what just happened to Caitlin Clark wasn't just a loss. It was a statement, a message. And the way it all unfolded against the Dallas Wings had people asking one brutal question. Did the league just humble its biggest star? From the very first possession, something felt off. The confidence? Gone. The rhythm? Broken. The shots that used to drop from the logo? Clanging off the rim like the pressure finally caught up. And it didn't stop there. Turnovers started piling up. Defenders were reading her like a book. And every single mistake was happening live in front of millions. This wasn't just defense. This felt personal. Like the Dallas Wings came in with one goal. Make sure the hype ends tonight. And for the first time in her career, Caitlin Clark didn't look unstoppable. She looked frustrated, overwhelmed, even a little lost. But here's the part nobody saw coming. Because while everyone was focused on what happened on the court, the real story was already unfolding behind the scenes. And it involved two names nobody expected to be at the center of this. Lexie Hull, Sophie Cunningham. Because what happened after that loss didn't just shake her confidence, it forced a decision. A move so unexpected, it might have just changed the entire direction of her career. And once you hear what really went down, that loss will feel like the smallest part of the story. To understand why that loss hit so hard, you have to go back to what Caitlin Clark represented before she ever stepped onto a WNBA court. Because she wasn't just another rookie. She was the rookie, the face, the hype, the future. Coming out of college, Caitlin Clark wasn't just dominating games, she was rewriting expectations. Deep threes from the logo, insane court vision, record-breaking performances. She didn't just play basketball, she controlled it. At University of Iowa women's basketball, everything revolved around her, but here's the part people sometimes forget. She didn't do it alone. Because behind all that spotlight, there were pieces that made it work. And two of those pieces were Lexie Hull and Sophie Cunningham. Now, whether it was spacing the floor, taking pressure off her defensively, or simply understanding her rhythm, these weren't just teammates. They were chemistry. They were comfort. They were the type of players who knew exactly where she'd be before she even moved. And when you have that kind of connection, it changes everything. Which is why when Caitlin Clark entered the WNBA with the Indiana Fever, fans didn't just expect her to succeed, they expected a continuation of that magic. The idea was simple. Bring the same formula. Get the same results. But here's the reality nobody wanted to admit. The WNBA doesn't work like college. This isn't a system built around one player. This is a league full of veterans, players who've been grinding for years, players who aren't impressed by hype, and most importantly, players who don't care about your past. And that's where things started to shift. Because from the moment Caitlin Clark stepped into that environment, the expectations didn't just follow her, they multiplied. Every game became a test. Every possession became a statement. Every mistake became a headline. And while fans were expecting dominance, the league was preparing something else entirely: resistance, physical defense, pressure that she hadn't faced at that level before. And slowly, that pressure started to show. Because the shots that once felt automatic became contested. The passes that once looked effortless became risky. And the confidence that once defined her game started getting tested. But here's where things get deeper. Because while the on-court challenges were building, something else was happening behind the scenes. Something that would hit even harder than any loss. Because early in the season, the Indiana Fever made a decision. A business decision. A cold decision. One that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with reality. And that decision involved the very players people thought would be her support system. Lexie Hull, Sophie Cunningham. Now again, this is where the narrative gets complicated. Because in professional sports, roster moves happen all the time. Players get cut. Rotations change. Decisions get made based on fit, performance, and strategy. But when those decisions affect someone like Caitlin Clark, it hits differently. Because from the outside, it looked like more than just a move. It felt like a shift, a signal, and fans noticed immediately. Why remove players who could potentially stabilize your franchise star? Why break familiarity when she's still adjusting? Why make things harder instead of easier? Those questions, they started spreading fast. And once the internet gets involved, it doesn't stay simple. Some people called it strategy. Others called it a mistake. And then there were those who went further, saying this was a message, a reminder that no matter how big her name is, she doesn't control the system. Now, whether that's true or not is still debated. But what's not debated is how it affected the situation. Because suddenly, Caitlin Clark wasn't just adjusting to a new league. She was doing it without the comfort of familiarity, without the players who understood her instinctively, without that safety net, and that's when the pressure really started to build. Because now, every game wasn't just about performance. It was about adaptation, survival, proving that she could still dominate in a completely different environment. And then came the Dallas Wings game, the moment everything collided. All the pressure, all the expectations, all the adjustments she was still trying to figure out. It all showed up in one place, one game, one performance. And what happened there didn't just expose weaknesses. It triggered something bigger. Because sometimes it's not the loss itself that changes everything. It's what that loss reveals. And in this case, it revealed a reality Caitlin Clark couldn't ignore anymore. A reality that forced her to make a decision that nobody saw coming. The moment that game ended, you could feel it. Not just disappointment, not just frustration, something heavier. Because what happened against the Dallas Wings wasn't just a bad night for Caitlin Clark. It felt like a complete shutdown. From the opening minutes, the Wings didn't just defend her, they targeted her. Every touch was pressured. Every step was contested. Every shot had a hand in her face. It wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. Like they came in with one mission: make her uncomfortable and keep her there. And it worked. Because for the first time in a long time, everything that used to feel natural for Caitlin Clark started breaking down. The deep threes? Off. Way off. The passes? Getting picked apart. The tempo she usually controlled? Completely disrupted. And you could see it in real time. The body language. The frustration. The looks toward the bench like she was searching for answers that just weren't there. This wasn't the Caitlin Clark fans we're used to seeing. This was someone trying to figure things out while the entire world was watching. And that's what made it brutal. Because it wasn't happening quietly. It was happening live. But here's where the real conflict begins. Because while everyone focused on what was happening on the court, something else was happening at the same time. Something that made this loss feel even worse. Because after the game, the conversation shifted fast. And it wasn't just about her performance anymore. It became about her situation, her environment, her support system, or the lack of it. Because almost immediately, people started connecting this performance to what happened earlier. The roster decisions, the absence of familiarity, the lack of players who truly understood her game. And suddenly, that loss didn't feel isolated anymore. It felt connected, like a result of everything that had been building behind the scenes. And that's when the first twist hits. Because instead of responding emotionally, instead of lashing out, Caitlin Clark did something unexpected. She went quiet. No dramatic statements. No public frustration. No visible reaction online. Just silence. And that silence, that's what caught people off guard. Because in moments like this, most athletes respond. They address it. They explain it. But she didn't. And when someone with that much attention goes silent, people start asking questions. Big ones. Was she frustrated with the team? Was she questioning the system? Was something happening behind the scenes that we weren't seeing? Because silence like that, it doesn't just happen for no reason. And that's when the second twist starts forming. Because while the public was speculating, those closest to the situation started noticing a shift. Subtle at first, but real. The way she approached the next practices, the way she carried herself in interviews, the tone, the energy. It was different, more controlled, more calculated, less emotional. And that's when people started realizing this wasn't just a bad game. This was a turning point. Because instead of breaking under pressure, she was adapting, but not in the way people expected. Because this wasn't just about fixing her shot, or reducing turnovers, or adjusting to defense. This was deeper. This was about understanding the system she was in. Because up until that moment, she had been playing the game the way she always had. Fast, free, creative. But now, she was realizing something important. That style alone might not be enough here. And that realization, that's what triggered the move. Not a trade, not a public demand, but something internal. A shift in how she sees the game. And more importantly, how she sees her role in it. Because what that Dallas game exposed wasn't just weaknesses. It exposed reality. The reality that this league is physical, this league is strategic, and this league does not adjust to you, you adjust to it. And once that hits you, you either struggle or you evolve. And based on everything we're seeing, Caitlin Clark chose to evolve. But here's the part that makes this even more intense. Because evolution in this league doesn't just mean improving your skills. It means understanding power, understanding influence, understanding how decisions get made, and who actually controls them. And that's where this situation gets deeper than basketball. Because now, it's not just about her performance. It's about her position, her leverage, her value to the league. Because whether people admit it or not, she brings attention, she brings viewership, she brings energy that the league hasn't seen in a long time. And that kind of presence, it changes things. But only if you use it. And that's exactly what this moment forced her to realize. Because the game against Dallas, it didn't just challenge her physically. It forced her to rethink everything. Who she trusts, how she plays, and how she moves within a system that isn't built around her. And that's what makes this the first real turning point in her career. Because from this moment forward, she's not just reacting anymore. She's adjusting. Strategically, mentally, and maybe even politically. And if that's the case, then this loss wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Because when a player like Caitlin Clark starts thinking differently, the entire dynamic changes. And what happens next might be the most important part of this story. And just when it looked like that Dallas loss was simply a wake-up call, it turned into something much bigger. Because over the next few days, the shift in Caitlin Clark wasn't just noticeable, it was undeniable. At first, it was subtle. Shorter answers in interviews, less emotion on the court, more control in how she carried herself. But then people started paying closer attention. And that's when the conversation changed. Because analysts, fans, and even insiders began pointing out something that didn't get enough attention at first. This wasn't just about performance anymore. It was about positioning. Because after that loss, Caitlin Clark didn't just start adjusting her game, she started adjusting her presence. The way she interacted with media, the way she handled pressure, even the way certain moments were allowed to play out publicly. And that's where the career move part of this story starts to reveal itself. Because it wasn't loud, it wasn't announced, it wasn't even obvious unless you were really watching, but it was happening. And it was strategic. Because instead of trying to fight every narrative, she started controlling which ones mattered. Instead of reacting to criticism, she started letting it build, letting it create pressure, letting it shift attention. And that's when something interesting started happening. Every hard foul, every missed call, every physical moment on the court started getting amplified, not just by fans, but by media. Because now, every clip of her getting hit, bumped, or challenged was being replayed, analyzed, debated. And that attention, it wasn't accidental. Because when a player reaches a certain level of visibility, everything becomes bigger. And in Caitlin Clark's case, that visibility is massive. Which brings us to the shocking reveal. Because the real move she made after that loss wasn't about changing teams or demanding anything publicly. It was about leverage. Because whether people realize it or not, Caitlin Clark isn't just a player. She's a brand, a global one. From endorsements to media coverage to game attendance, her presence impacts the entire league. And after that Dallas game, it became clear she understood that fully. Because from that point forward, every situation she was involved in started carrying more weight, more attention, more pressure on the people around her. And that changes how decisions get made. Because when a player becomes that valuable, organizations don't just manage them, they protect them. And if they don't, the pressure builds publicly, which is exactly what started happening. Because fans weren't just reacting to her performance anymore, they were reacting to how she was being treated, questioning calls, questioning physical play, questioning whether the league was doing enough to support its biggest star. And that narrative, it spread fast because it taps into something powerful, the idea of a star versus the system. And once that narrative takes hold, it's hard to control. But here's where things get even more intense. Because while all of this is happening externally, internally, something else is shifting. Because now, Caitlin Clark isn't just adapting to the league. She's learning how the league works, how decisions are made, how influence moves, how power is used. And that knowledge, that's what separates good players from game changers. Because talent gets you attention, but understanding the system, that's what gives you control. And based on everything we're seeing, she's starting to figure that out fast. But here's the part that makes this a true escalation. Because not everyone is going to be comfortable with that shift. Because when a rookie starts gaining that level of influence, it changes dynamics. Veterans notice, teams notice, the league notices, and that can create tension. Because now, it's not just about basketball anymore. It's about control, respect, hierarchy, and where she fits within all of that. Which brings everything back to that original loss. Because what happened against the Dallas Wings wasn't just a tough game. It was a message, a test, a moment designed intentionally or not to see how she would respond under pressure. And based on what we're seeing now, she didn't break. She adjusted in a way that might have just changed her entire trajectory. Because instead of shrinking after that moment, she expanded, not just as a player, but as a presence. And that's the part people are only just starting to realize. Because this isn't just about what she does on the court anymore. It's about what she represents off it. And if that continues to grow, then the impact of that Dallas loss might end up being the most important moment of her entire career. Because sometimes, the biggest losses create the biggest shifts. And if this shift keeps building, then what comes next might change more than just her game. By this point, the conversation had completely taken over. Not just sports media, not just fan pages. Everyone was talking about Caitlin Clark after that loss to the Dallas Wings. And just like every major moment involving a player this big, the reaction split instantly. On one side, you had people saying, "This is exactly what the WNBA is supposed to look like. This is real competition. She's finally facing elite defenders who aren't impressed by hype." For them, what happened wasn't shocking. It was expected. They saw it as a necessary moment, a reality check that every great player goes through. A reminder that no matter how dominant you were in college, the professional level is different, faster, stronger, smarter. And in their eyes, this was just part of the process. But then, there was the other side. And they weren't looking at it the same way at all. They were saying, this wasn't just defense, this felt targeted. Why does it look like the entire league is trying to shut her down? Is the league doing enough to protect its biggest star? And those questions, they started gaining traction fast. Because when a player has as much visibility as Caitlin Clark, everything gets amplified. Every foul, every hit, every missed call, and once those moments start getting clipped and shared online, they take on a life of their own. Suddenly, it's not just a game anymore. It's a narrative. And that narrative was turning into something much bigger. Because now, people weren't just debating her performance, they were debating the environment around her, the way she was being officiated, the physicality she was facing, and whether or not the league was handling it correctly. And once that conversation starts, it doesn't go away. Because it taps into something deeper. Fairness, respect, power, and where she fits into all of that. But it didn't stop with fans. Analysts started weighing in. Former players, media personalities. Everyone had a take. Some praised her for staying composed despite the pressure. Others questioned whether she was ready for this level of intensity. And a few went even further, saying this moment could define her entire rookie season. Because how she responds to this kind of pressure, that's what separates good players from great ones. And that's exactly why the spotlight got even bigger. Because now, every game wasn't just about wins and losses. It was about narrative. Is she bouncing back? Is she struggling? Is she adapting? Every performance became part of a larger story. And then came another layer of reaction, the business side. Because while fans and analysts were debating, there were bigger forces watching closely. Sponsors, networks, organizations. Because like it or not, Caitlin Clark isn't just a player. She's a major investment. Her games bring viewers. Her presence drives attention. And that attention, it has value. A lot of it. Which means moments like this don't just impact perception, they impact decisions. How she's marketed, how she's positioned, how the league presents her moving forward. And that's where things get really interesting. Because now, the reaction isn't just emotional, it's strategic. Because the league has to balance two things: competition and visibility. They want the game to be physical, competitive, real, but they also want their biggest star to shine. And when those two things collide, that's when tension builds. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Because some people feel like she's being tested too hard. Others feel like she needs it. And that divide? It's what's fueling this entire conversation. But here's the part that makes this moment so important. Because while everyone is reacting externally, internally, the shift is already happening. The way she's being viewed, the way she's being discussed, the way she's being positioned within the league. It's all changing. Because now, she's not just the hype rookie anymore. She's the player people are watching closely, analyzing, questioning, expecting more from. And that's a different kind of pressure. A heavier one, but also a more powerful one. Because if she rises from this moment, if she adapts, adjusts, and takes control of the narrative, then this loss becomes part of her story, not the end of it. And that's why this moment feels so big. Because it's not just about what happened, it's about what it leads to. And right now, everyone is waiting to see what that is. Because depending on what happens next, this could either be remembered as a setback or the moment everything changed. Just when it feels like you figured this story out, it flips. Because the biggest twist isn't what happened on the court, it's what's happening after it. Because here's the reality: what we saw with Caitlin Clark against the Dallas Wings, that wasn't just a bad game. It was a trigger, a moment that forced something to change. And that change, it's already happening quietly. Because while the internet is still arguing about fouls, defense, and whether she got exposed, something else is taking place behind the scenes. A shift in control, a shift in awareness, a shift in how she moves. Because think about it. Before this moment, Caitlin Clark was playing the game. Now, she's learning how the system works. And that's a completely different level. Because once a player understands that their value isn't just in points or assists, but in attention, in viewership, in influence, everything changes. And that's the final twist. Because the huge career move everyone is talking about, it's not a trade. It's not a contract. It's not something you'll see announced on TV. It's internal. It's strategic. It's the moment she stopped being just a player and started becoming something much bigger. A decision to take control of her narrative, to understand her leverage, to recognize that her presence alone can shift conversations across the entire league. And once that happens, you can't go back. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because that kind of shift doesn't just affect her, it affects everyone around her. Teammates, coaches, opponents, the league itself. Because now, every move she makes carries more weight. Every game gets more attention. Every situation becomes bigger. And that can create friction. Because not everyone is going to be comfortable with that level of influence coming from a rookie. Which means this isn't just about growth anymore. It's about conflict, potentially bigger conflict. Because when power starts shifting, there's always resistance. And that's what makes this moment so important. Because we're not just watching a player develop, we're watching a transformation. From hype to pressure to awareness to control. And transformations like that, they don't happen quietly. They come with consequences. Because now the expectations are even higher. The spotlight is even brighter. And the margin for error, even smaller. Which means what comes next is critical. Because she has two paths in front of her. She can continue adapting, learning the system, using her influence, and eventually reshape how things work around her. Or the pressure, the expectations, the resistance could slow everything down. Because this league doesn't just test talent. It tests mindset. It tests resilience. It tests how far you're willing to go to take control of your own career. And based on everything we've seen so far, she's just getting started. Because that loss to Dallas, that wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a completely different chapter. One that's less about highlight plays and more about power. And if that continues to build, then this story isn't just about Caitlin Clark anymore. It's about the future of the entire league. Which brings us to the biggest question of all. What happens when a player this influential decides she's no longer just playing the game, but changing it? Because if that moment is coming, and it looks like it is, then what we've seen so far might only be the setup, and what comes next might be the part that changes everything. Now I want to hear from you, because this is one of those moments where opinions are completely split. After watching what happened to Caitlin Clark against the Dallas Wings, what do you think? Was this just a normal rookie struggle? Or did it feel like something deeper was happening? And let's talk about the bigger picture. Do you think she's really starting to understand her power in the league? Or is the pressure starting to get to her? Be honest in the comments. I'm reading everything, and the debates around this are getting crazy right now. But don't just give a quick answer. Explain it. What did you see in that game? What stood out to you the most? And what do you think happens next? Because this isn't just about one loss anymore. It's about what that loss leads to. And based on everything we've seen, it feels like something bigger is coming. So make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because if anything new develops around this situation, you already know we're breaking it down immediately. And trust me, this story, it's far from over. So stay locked in, because the next update might be the one that flips everything.